Hi, welcome to Angel's Nook, where anything can become a canvas for creativity. Furniture is just the beginning. Be prepared to be inspired by a wide range of projects and finishing techniques. Be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any of the new videos. Having a lifelong love of lighthouses and the areas that they sit in, it was really easy to imagine putting one in our front flower beds as a landscape feature. But as we looked for different styles and sizes, we just simply could not find one that had the style, design, and look that we were looking for because we wanted something that looked more realistic. So, as with many other projects, we made our own, beginning with figuring out how to engineer this cliff base, which with two creatives in the house, it is a unique process, starting with a quilt and cement. Yes, a quilt and cement. From there was a lot more backward design planning and engineering to figure out how to make each step of this project come together in a workable format, including, among other things, hand applying each stone individually, adding mortar, creating a beacon that revolves, and interior lighting for the lighthouse that's solar powered so that it could be placed anywhere that you wanted to move it to. The buildings alone looked great on the cliff top when they were put there with the grass, but they just seemed unfinished. So more details were planned out, thought about, and added, beginning with stepping stones for the house and the lighthouse to provide usable pathways after storms and in the inevitable moist air of the sea cliff. In addition, flowers were added by the front door. Then imagining the vistas that you would see, the gorgeous views that could be seen. What could be more perfect than adding a fire pit and Adirondack chairs as a place to enjoy them? Next, a tumbling pile of boulders was added to the side of the house for both interest and to tie back to the stones that go down the front of the cliff. That was followed by a meandering stone wall to act as a windbreak and a warning of the cliff's edge. The final pieces added were trees in the back to create texture and balance to the scene. Imagine the wind blowing through those pine trees, causing them to whisper in chorus to the waves crashing at the base of the cliff. By adding the additional details, the scene becomes more complete, more interesting, and invites you in your imagination to feel yourself standing on that cliff, enjoying the space and the sea air. Join us for step-by-step videos on how we completed this project. Welcome to the first steps of this lighthouse project. What started out as a very simple idea of we'd really like to have a large lighthouse in the front garden bed of our house once we found the lighthouse, which was going to need a lot of work and paint and upgrades because it wasn't in the lines and the shape that we really wanted, but it was a good base. Then the discussions became, but a lighthouse never is just a lighthouse. It always has a keeper's house, and there's always a connector into the lighthouse. So that's where this came about. There is a paper pattern that I have made that will be disassembled to cut the pieces to actually make a wood frame for the house. And the house then, because of course we don't want it just painted, it's going to have a stone veneer, and the base of the lighthouse will have a stone veneer. But to start with, there are the pieces for this, and I realized after I had done the ratio with this paper pattern that my roof was 1/4 inch too short this way for enough overhang. So I've simply marked that on the pattern that I need to change that. Each of these pieces will come down. It's probably hard to see, but I have already sketched out on here the doors, the 3 windows, and on this side, 2 windows on that side. So those will be cut out once the main pieces of the 1/4 inch cedar are cut. And that's how we start here. Something simple becomes more complex, more creative, and continues to roll till we get the finished piece of what we want. In our workshop, we have a table saw, so in order to cut these efficiently, the pieces, I laid them out in a manner that would allow us to make straight long cuts on the table saw to get the sharpest, crispest edge to assemble the house. But it can also be cut on a scroll saw. Before cutting, all of the pieces were marked out using a Sharpie marker so that the lines would be clear and easy to see as we were cutting them. They're also all labeled for which piece they are and which side they are with painter's tape, just to keep track of the pieces and what we were doing with them. If you have to use a scroll saw, it's a little more awkward getting your first pieces cut. And again, if I were going to cut all the pieces, I would line them up in such a way that there were some straight cuts to start with to get into smaller, more manageable pieces. But when using the scroll saw, you have to be extra careful, take your time, that you are keeping your saw blade exactly on those lines, or you're going to have difficulty with the assembly because the sides are not going to be smoothly lined up to match against each other to construct the house. The pieces have all been cut. They're mocked back up to double check the spacing. For instance, the top of this lean-to or the galley between the home for the lighthouse and the lighthouse tower itself has got to have shingles attached to it, so it needs clearance here. So all that's working. The insides have had solid pieces of wood cut to keep it squared up. And the next phase that's going to have to happen is to put the cuts in to allow for both the doors and the windows. The windows will be completely cut out so that light comes through from the light source we'll put on the inside, and the door will always remain closed. To make sure I'm putting it where I want it on the front of here. Well, it doesn't want to cooperate, but I know I'm in the ballpark here, which helps. I've already folded a line in the center. I'm going to use the square to line up the window itself. And marking the corners that I can square off. The base of the windows are level, so they're equal distance from the door. And the side will be done exactly the same way. Top to keep it oriented correctly when the windows are lined up. I'm going to use the line underneath the windows. Mark the line on this side. The windows are all at the same height to each other. Ink makes it easier to see. Pencil gives you leeway for mistakes in the first marks. In order to cut out the windows, the doors in this, drill holes were put through first to make access for the blade, to make it easier to get into the different areas. And if you notice, there's a lot of back up, come forward, back up, come forward. That allows you to keep straight lines and not go beyond where you want your cuts to be. The front and sides are all cut, sanded. Now to double check that the windows will sit flush. And it's beginning to look more like a house. Well, of course the door wants to fall out. Because nothing's glued, nor will it be for a while. So the wood that we ordered for this project, the 1/4-inch cedar, was supposed to be solid cedar, but it arrived as a cedar paneling. So both the inside and the outside of all the wood pieces were coated with 2 coats of polyurethane. Shellac would have worked equally well to help seal and waterproof the wood before more work was done on it, but We had the polyurethane and it was going to work too, so that's what was used on these pieces to seal them. And as I painted them, I also sealed the inside cut edges of any of the windows, the doors, to make sure those edges got sealed with the polyurethane as well. The first piece that was glued together was the interconnecting lean-to between the Lighthouse and the keeper house. They're all taped together to keep them lined up and to make it easier for me to put glue between each of the seams before wrapping it around the base. The glue that's being used is Titebond Quick and Thick. It's a multi-surface glue. It dries really quickly, it dries clear, and it's paintable. It holds up really well. We've used it on a lot of other projects and it's become the favorite glue for quick dry and really good hold. As an additional hold and also sealer for the edges of that raw wood, we used a product called Weld Superweld Light Activated Instant Glue. It's a super glue, but it's light activated and it really leaves a good seal and a really good tight hold. It'll glue almost anything together. Assembling the house portion with all its walls is definitely a four-hand job. Wax paper is on the countertop because the base to the house that the sides are being applied to has already had glue on it to prevent the glue from getting into the countertop. And since that glue dries so fast, because again we're using the Titebond Quick and Thick, we did not want the house to adhere to the surface. And then each of the sides were stapled into the base to hold that in place. All the wood pieces were assembled with the cedar sheathing facing to the outside to give it the most weatherproofing possible. Once all those pieces were stapled to the base, then we worked on using the Weld super glue on the upper corners to make sure that that framing stayed straight and plumb. And then each of those edges had the super glue run down the outside of it. The inside of it had the Titebond glue put onto all of the inner seams, both along the floor and along where each side met, to give the side stability and strength. The roof placement and size was double checked on the roof area and then marked for the notch to come out so that the roofing would fit back against the chimney the way it should. The last cut that was done on this was an angle cut that you can see in the final images that allow this to be watertight. Once we get it applied and all the shingles put on, it's going to fit tightly up against that stone with a nice smooth edge to it. We've got the frame up on the house and the lean-to connector all finished, dry, ready to go. It's also been painted on the inside with 2 coats of white, the color Cashmere, to give it more waterproofing and also to act as a reflection for the lights that will eventually go in there.
Oh boy, here we go. Treat, 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 treat. So close. Come here, you little! I'm getting dizzy. Oh, crap! I'm sorry, Mom.
Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be working on the shingles to the roof and starting to stone the house. As with many things, when you want to put details that are authentic and realistic, it winds up taking a lot longer than you thought. But it's worth it in the end. So let's get started. On a full-scale house that you would live on, strips of wood are put across the roof to line up shake shingles. But in this case, these shingles are so thin that I don't need to put any additional wood. I just need to have lines marked up on them to be as my guide for what I'm doing. I know what those measurements are from having done this piece yesterday, so it's just a matter of making the lines. And I've also marked a center point on the vertical of this to help me keep that where I want it. To start the bottom row, I start with a full piece in the middle. Because that's going to keep the roof centered and not give me a lopsided look when it's finished. Sadly, when you order the shingles, you get all different thicknesses, all different shapes, and it winds up being a figure out what you're going to do with it to try to make it look even. Regular shake pieces for a real roof aren't this irregular. There's thicks and thins, and I'm using my thicker on the bottom pieces, and I'll use the thinner pieces up at the top where I'm going to need that copper to fit nicely. Super thick ones are kind of useless. Second row centers over the splits below, and that keeps alternating. Gives the shape to the roof and makes it waterproof on a real home. And hopefully it will help this last outdoors as well. The cedar shake needs to have some sealant on it because I doubt seriously that these are really cedar, having bought them online as pieces for indoor miniature work. So this is going to get sealed with a coat of satin polyurethane, so it's not going to make these shimmery when it dries, but it's going to give them an extra coat of repellent against water from outside. It will also enrich the color on it. I'm pushing up underneath here to get it underneath the lap. The edges of the eaves, once this dries, will all get painted as though it were a painted edge in pure white. But you can see the difference between what's been had the finish added and what's not for the depth of color on it.
Hey you, get out of my way! Coming through. I'm curious. Do you like what my mum and pa are doing with this YouTube channel? Do you want to see them do more videos like this? If so, I have something to say about it. Mum and Pa are working their butts off here. Do it, do it. Clickety-click the buttons. Hey, I've been looking everywhere for you guys. So sorry. When I take my humans to the park for training, I get so excited that sometimes I can't control myself, and Pa has to censor my pictures. Oops, he missed one. They obviously need more training. Mommy, you need to talk to Papa. He forgot to cover me. Wee.
The lean-to, which is going to act as the corridor between the main house, the living quarters, and the lighthouse itself, is fully dry. Its roof is ready to go once we get to that point. But all of the seams inside and out have been sealed with wood glue to help it resist water from being outside when we place this outside eventually, even though it will have a waterproof coating added on top. So eventually what we want to have is this stone look all over the outside of it, the house, and the base of the lighthouse. But it takes multiple steps to get there, to make everything stay in place. Because this is not like creating a stone on the outside of the house, because we don't have pieces that are going to lay flat and fit there. So initially, the first steps are to figure out using different size stones to fill in the front and the back. The sides won't get anything because they're going to butt up against the lighthouse and the house itself. And some fill will need to be done on these two edges against the house and against the lighthouse. The rocks have all been washed to get most of the dust off and to allow you to see actually what colors are within this. One of the best parts of the caulk is it allows you to move this even after you have them in place. You have the ability to wobble them a little bit to either change the direction or to push them in tighter. Caulk can also work as a leveler to help you get the stone angled the way you want it to be. Yes, got clearance, but it goes up where it should be. The edges of each of the openings are done first with stone. The stones right now are separated into very small, medium, and larger stones. So the very small and a few of the medium fit around these openings so that you'll see the window can fit in well. Those, after they're fitted, have to dry completely before any more stone is put in place so that they don't move in and keep the windows from fitting. the sides butt into each other, you work on the flat side first, and then you begin to piece in small stones to fit any of the gaps. And you want to fit your stone first before you put any caulk on it to put it in place. So it's a trial and error of what is going to fit and butt into these places tightly. When you see a gap, you look for whatever type of smaller stone will fit into those gaps. Sometimes it's placing more of the larger stones first and then coming back, and sometimes it works as you're moving along it. But you still want to keep the corner as much of a true outside corner as you can so that it doesn't become totally rounded. This gives you a better view of how the mortar is put into the stone than a little bit later part of the video. We had some camera difficulties and wanted to let you see exactly how this is going in first. You can see it does quite a bit of covering of the stone, but you're actually trying to work it into those crevices. On a small piece, I can use this small chisel that has a little bit of a scoop end on it. On the bigger sides, I have to use the plastic knife more because the mortar, this concrete, actually will set up too fast and you waste a lot of your material. In this section here, the mortar had dried for about 30 minutes. You go back with the toothbrush works really well to knock off the loose, and then dipping the toothbrush into water. That's what the point it's at here, and it was getting the whole surface wet. Brushing it and then using the paper towel to wipe off all the excess mortar. The mortar that's down between the stones stays in place, but this way you have uncovered the stone so that when it's dry and top coated, it's going to look like laid stone. The rock is all solid dry into its adhesive, and now it needs to have mortar added to it, which should start with 1 part sand, 3 parts of, we're using concrete leveler, and we're going to start with 1 spoon of water, which is not going to be enough. I've got stuff on there, so that's about a half a spoon of water. And adding the water until we get the mixture that we need this to be, the consistency. And that is too many, so I'm going to put a pinch leveler in it, and now you've got a thick mud. Plastic knife has worked really well for me for getting this along and into the grooves where it needs to go. We had concrete leveler already in the house from another project, so we tried it to see if it would work for this, and it worked really well. I have no idea how a mix of regular concrete would work, but I have the feeling that the leveler is actually helping with this to leave a smooth mortar like there would have been had the stone actually been laid with mortar, but they would not have stayed in place for this project. They needed to be glued in place first. Will also help keep the stone in place in weather. The fact that it's got adhesive under it. These have dried overnight as I stopped working on it yesterday, and now there's a few places where there are holes where the concrete either didn't fill in, air bubbles dried out, and there were a few places that I had to glue stones back in, plus a few blanks in this with the mortar as well, which I kind of expected. So the first thing I'm going to do is fix these, let them dry, and then I'll rotate this to start working on another side. In this case, this side of this one, and I'll probably do the back of this. No, I won't, because I've got to get the chimney adjusted first. I'll do the front of this where the windows are next, and that'll keep this going. Not mixing up very much because I can't rotate this yet to work on another side. We happen to have a set of tiny chisels, which will help me work some of this mortar into the holes without the amount of coverage I did before. That's not a good way to do it when you're doing the whole thing, because your concrete will set up too fast to work this slow. This works really nicely getting into the curves, letting the edge of it push it down into those cracks. So that hopefully, when it dries this time, it's not going to have any cracks left. These windows are a beautiful crisp white right now, but since the lighthouse is going to be outside in a lot of brutal Florida sun, I'm adding a top coat to it because white plastic left in the sun notoriously turns yellow over time, and I don't want that look against the bright white that's also going to be on the lighthouse. So I'm using a product by All-in-One Paint called Cashmere. It's white. It has primer, paint, and top coat in it. It's exterior rated, so it's going to do a great job of maintaining these a crisp white color. I'm adding a coat of paint on the inside to help seal the wood a little bit more, and on the main house so that there's more reflection for the lights that are going to go on the inside of it. The wood itself will help to mute the lights, and I don't want that. I'm not worried about a great coat of paint in here, just getting it on there for some reflective value. A number of things have happened with this house. We have done a top coat onto the stone and the mortar after it was finished. Jim's done a lot of work grinding with diamond bits to get the stone out of the way for this roof to fit. And it also now has 2 strips of brass on it that are going to be painted copper. And the front has finished eaves on it. There's a little bit more work that has to be done on the roof. The roof's top pieces are going to be copper, like this is. And then we've already drilled holes to get the solar source in for the fairy lights that will light this house, and another set will light the main body of the lighthouse. I've got 1 door left that needs to be put on. Only door. The windows are all in, but it was all done the same methodology. They were all fitted to make sure there was nothing that had to be scraped out of the way or ground out of the way after the mortar and rock had set. This is a waterproof caulk that will seal these. Pushing the top in first. The last stones on the chimney could not go in until the roof was in place. But to protect the roofing and all, the roof is still removable while that's being done. And chimney pots need to go on. They've been sealed with clear silicone since they're open in the middle so that they will not direct water into the wood. It's important to make sure that those chimney pots were straight and level, because once they dry, if they're crooked, they're not going to look good. So that's why there's so much touching of those chimney pots, is to get them aligned properly. I'm using copper metallic antiquing by Heirloom Traditions paint, all in one. I've used it on a number of outdoor projects, and unlike some metallics, it does not fade, and it doesn't peel or chip. It's water-based, so there's easy cleanup. Light swipe with the brush. It will level itself out when it dries. Once the windows and doors were installed, there were tiny gaps around the windows and against the stone that needed to be filled with mortar. I used a thinner solution of the leveler and pulled it into a plastic glue syringe and carefully used the syringe tip to put it into the areas I wanted, and then blotted it back with, since it was much wetter, I was able to blot it back or blot off any of the excess with just a dry paper towel, but that allowed all those edges to be completely sealed and have a finished look. The solar fairy lights were fitted within the inside of the cabin because they're totally separate from the ones in the main lighthouse tower. They were shaped and checked repeatedly to make sure that I had them bent in a way that was going to make them very visible through the windows to produce the light. If they're just in the center, you don't get light from them. So that also required super gluing points to the walls and also super gluing together coils in different areas to make them hold their shape so that when the cabin is moved or lifted around, they're not going to shift out of shape and they're going to stay where they need to be to properly light those windows at night. And this, the roof and all is fully fitted. Everything is fitted here. The roof is not glued on yet, which is why you can see a light gap there, because we won't do that until it is installed onto the base.
You will not believe how long it took to train my mom and pa to do this trick so that I can relax and enjoy myself. You're doing fine, Papa. Keep up the good work. Hi, Mummy. Look at me, hot diggity dog. This is the life. It took weeks to train them, but it was worth it. Do you want to see them do more videos like this? If so, I have something to say about it. Come on, my humans are working their butts off here. Do it, do it! Clickety-click the buttons. Oh my, I'm getting dizzy. If you want more videos like this one, please subscribe. If you do, I will get to train my humans to do more cool things like this. I trained my mom to give me a treat when I'm done. Oh yes, good girl.